Hi, I'm Alan. My normal co-host, Dennis Sharon, is taking some time off enjoying a sabbatical from work. Since Dennis is out, we're going to rotate with some guest interviewers. Today I'm joined by my fellow shareholder, Rachel Godwin.
We're excited to be joined this week by Carol McPhail. She is the Internal Communication Director with USA Health and helps the Mitchell Cancer Institute produce their Cancering podcast here at Deep Fried Studios. Today you will hear about her path from journalism to PR and more about their podcast about cancer.
Welcome to Playing Above the Line. We're a podcast that takes a peek into the daily lives of community and business leaders. Each week we uncover different views of the path to growth, leadership, and achieving success. I'm Dennis Sharon.
And I'm Alan Cave. Dennis and I are both shareholders at Hartman, Blackman & Kilgore. We're a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. As CPAs, we've had the unique opportunity to work with many different leaders and decided we wanted a way to share their incredible stories that we've learned along the way. Rachel, it's a beautiful day at Deep Fried Studios today. How are you?
I am good, Alan. How are you today?
Good, I'm good. And we're honored today to have as our guest Carol McPhail. And Carol is currently with Mitchell Cancer Institute, and so we're going to let her start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I love this space. This is such a cool place, the Container Yard.
It is.
I'm Carol McPhail, and I work in marketing and communications with Mitchell Cancer Institute and also with USA Health as a whole. Mitchell Cancer Institute is part of that whole. And I've been there about 4 years and just having a lot of fun telling some pretty cool stories about healthcare and cancer stories that, are, by the way, are not depressing, okay? But
Well, and we'll get into this because I know that you're part of a cancering podcast that's produced and recorded out of the same studio that we use for our podcast. And when Johnny was telling me about that when we first started this whole endeavor back a year ago, I was like, what? You're a cancering podcast? I just can't imagine. But so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay. I'm glad to know that it's not all gloom and doom. So that's a good thing. So how did you get to Mitchell? I know that you were a newspaper reporter, writer for years for the Mobile Register. So how did you end up there, and then from there to where you are now?
So definitely not a straight line. My career's been lots of curvy lines. I consider myself a journalist still. I know the term is thrown about a lot, storytelling or whatever, but really, that's kind of what it is. We're writing history just about every day or watching it happen and being a part of that. But no, I started out as a journalist right out of college from Mississippi. You can hear that in my voice. So years being a journalist, and then kind of had to rethink my career in my early 50s. So that's a lot of fun. But at that point, you're like, hey, why not, right? So that's how I ended up at the Cancer Institute, and love it. But yeah, a lot of curvy lines, not a straight line to here in public relations.
So I know with the Cancer Institute, there's a lot of research going on and things like that. You mentioned the podcast not being a negative podcast, but I think that's important for people to realize, yes, cancer is this huge, scary word, but there's a lot of research and things that are exciting that are going on from the perspective that you get to see.
That's right. Yeah. So what a lot of people should know but don't is that Mitchell Cancer Institute has been in Mobile since the early 2000s. Beautiful research and treatment facility on Spring Hill Avenue, not far from here, since 2008. And so people are actually doing basic research, like PhDs in the lab, doing research, trying to find better ways to treat and identify cancer and understand it. On the other side of the building, people coming in for treatment for chemotherapy, radiation. So when they come in, the building is so transparent in that area that researchers can see patients and patients can see researchers, which I think is so powerful. It was genius to do that. So
your role is communications coordinator.
Marketing communications.
Okay.
So my role has evolved a little bit. I was just at Mitchell Cancer for a few years, and now that's broadened a little to include more about USA Health. So I work on a team of marketing communications people.
Okay. So what does a day look like for you then? So is there a typical day?
There is not, which makes it super interesting. Yeah. And, you would think, oh, PR, whatever. But no, every day is completely different. This morning I was at a meeting with people talking about an upcoming event, and then went straight to coordinating an interview with a local TV reporter with a cancer survivor who was amazing. She's just incredible. And then, later this afternoon, do some other stuff. Podcasting, hello. So,
that's a good one.
So lots of fun. No day is the same. It's all different.
You talked a little bit about teamwork and the team that you work on and things like that. And I think that sometimes, the podcast is somewhat about leadership, but there's different types of leadership. Sometimes there's the very visual, this is the leader, take charge, running the show. And then there's those leaders who are maybe quietly serving. on those teams or whatever. So speak to that a little bit about where you see that and what you currently do, and maybe people that you work with, and then maybe somebody who has been a mentor or who has influenced you in your leadership style.
The cool thing about, working at MCI, I get to see, lots of really bright people. And on the marketing team, same. Just a lot of people who are great writers, great thinkers, know how to turn a phrase, know when to see a good story. But also on the cancer side, watching people balance an academic role where they're teaching whatever science they're teaching, and also like treating patients on the side and working with groups. I'm thinking in particular, the host of the podcast that we've been talking about, Dr. Jennifer Young-Pierce, is really good at getting a group together or leading a project, whatever. That's a good example, good role model. But really in my own life, probably the biggest mentor I had was at the newspaper when I was at the Press Register. And his name was Bailey Thompson. He was an editorial page editor, Alabama native, and he only spent a few years at the paper, but I was lucky enough to be hired around the time that he and a group of newspaper people from Shreveport had come in and had really changed the paper. So I was lucky enough to work under him in business reporting and also moving to the opinion side, where he really had a huge impact. So, I was happy to be part of the team, right? So, and supporting his vision for what could be done in Alabama, and especially with the Constitution. The Alabama Constitution is outdated and needs reform, and there's some real fundamental things that are holding Alabama back that are embedded in that Constitution. Unfortunately, he passed away early at age 52. There's still an effort to reform the Constitution, but seeing someone have that kind of vision gets you really on board. And so that's the strongest mentor and had the most impact on my life.
So obviously vision, one of the things that you mentioned about him had an impact, but you get to work with a lot of, or see, maybe not work directly with, but you see a lot of very smart, passionate people at Mitchell Cancer Institute and USA Healthcare. I mean, the doctors, the nurses, the researchers, all those people obviously have a passion for what they're doing. What are a couple of characteristics that you can point to that you've seen maybe in a couple of folks that have really stood out to you as being either a great leader or someone who can really motivate and get a team, to kind of pull in one direction behind them? Can you point to a couple of things?
I think just having a heart for cancer, having a heart for your patients. A lot of our leaders at the Mitchell Cancer Institute are also physicians, oncologists. But I've seen people who've been affected by cancer, haven't we all, right? But people who've personally been affected by cancer and the passion they have, and just being able to interact not only with their patients, but with their team, being good listeners, just thinking outside the box and just never stopping, just keep going and looking for new ways and encouraging each other. I think just having a real passion. You're not just going to work and clocking in, you're really making a difference in people's lives. So, and I've seen a lot of leaders who start with the patient first and everything else follows.
We talked about how cancer has affected everybody in some way, whether you had it personally or somebody in your family. So, what you're dealing with is affecting people's lives. So, how does your job translate that into this really technical medical jargon into relation that someone can understand, that reads the story, sees the blog post, listens to the podcast? What does that look like for you to take this really medical terminology and turn it into a story that somebody's going to, relate to?
So, I always think about it as I've got to tell this story the way I would to, my family, my next door neighbor, my mother, somebody who doesn't have that background, who's not a nurse, who's not a medical professional. And you always have to tie it back to what does it mean to your audience, and that's really key.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the podcast in more detail, because when we started Playing Above the Line, I think our, the overarching theme, I guess, is leadership and entrepreneurship, and just kind of looking at the folks that we've been honored and privileged to be associated with over the years, through the accounting firm, kind of what's made them great leaders and what's made them successful and that kind of thing. So, but I've got to think that when people are thinking about podcast concepts, that one on cancer is probably not the first thing that comes to mind.
Probably not.
I wouldn't think so. So how did it come about, and what's the vision? What do you want accomplished by folks that listen to the Cancering podcast?
Mm-hmm. It's always been difficult a little bit to kind of convey to people, the complexity, like you said, of research and new treatments coming out. I really feel like we're at an intersection, where things are really going to take off in cancer, in cancer treatment. But it's often hard to explain that in the written word in 600 words or on radio, especially TV, right? So I heard Johnny give a presentation about podcasting, and I thought, wow, that is perfect for what we're trying to explain. Like you can go a little bit more in depth or a lot more in depth, especially with a podcast where you've got a series of shows that can build on each other. So the team I was working with, my coworker at the time, Jennifer Zogby, who works for the mayor now, she and Johnny and I got together and started thinking about it, with the blessing of a cancer center director, of course, and just started thinking about it, started, throwing around ideas. And on a Friday afternoon at the container yard, where in its previous location, just, came up with the verb, like adulting, cancering. I don't even remember whose idea it was. Probably Johnny's. I don't know. But
Probably.
But I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is so much fun, creating something we think might really resonate with people. So that's sort of how it came about. And the goal is really to demystify cancer for people, because you see, the big C, this is the end. I don't think there's any scarier diagnosis, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to demystify cancer and to sort of, give people a voice. If they want to tell their stories, this is a great place to do it. And what I've learned from going to support groups, at the Cancer Institute and listening to survivors is that people want to talk about it. Like they share a story that not all of us do. If you have cancer yourself, or if you've had a child or a parent or whatever, you want to talk to somebody else who's been through that. And that's a real unique relationship. And so we believe this is a good way that people want to talk about it and want to hear about it and want to contribute their stories. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, I have a cousin who is currently undergoing treatment, and he kind of phrased it one day of he's now part of a team he didn't want to be on.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's life. And so to have that support and that network, and for something like this, the podcast, to be able to send those messages out of there is help and there are, just to get that message out there, I think is great.
That's a neat concept. And I like that. And I didn't really think about it until you started talking about it, but cancering is kind of like I'm not a grammar person, but it's like a present tense verb, I guess, maybe. So it's not something that, once you're diagnosed, it's an ongoing process, and really it becomes kind of just a part of your life, from then on, even after treatment and remission and that kind of thing. People are really tied to that diagnosis from then on, right?
Exactly right.
And it also has to do a lot. It involves other, not just them, not the patient. It fingers kind of, migrate out, and it touches all sorts of family members and, work associates and all kind of stuff. So, it's really an all-encompassing diagnosis. And so you're just trying to, I guess, put a face to that, really, is what you're doing. Yeah.
So Dr. Pierce, who's we call her Dr. JYP, but Dr. Pierce, who's the host of the podcast, says it best. She said, cancering's a team sport. We're all in it. We're doctors, friends, family, church family, coworkers, et cetera, just like you said. It really does. It's a team sport. It takes all of us. And so we're all cancering together.
Are you originally from this area? You said Mississippi, though.
Yeah,
like
I'm
Gulf
not.
Coast or?
No, I'm from Collins, Mississippi, so a little bitty town between Hattiesburg and Jackson. Probably if you drew a straight line west from Monroeville, it'd probably be you'd hit it pretty close.
Okay.
All right. What was your first job?
My first job was in high school working for the local newspaper. So that's really all I've ever done.
So it's took you on different paths, but it's been related to that. That's pretty neat.
It has. Now, I was never someone who was the police reporter or the court reporter or anything like that. I was mostly like copy editor, business reporter, other types, like opinion writer. Mm-hmm. I've never did the straight news stuff as much. The last thing I covered was religion, and I really did it because there were few job options. but that ended up being really cool. I got to go visit a tent revival and cover that. Got to meet a lot of really cool people. It's basically a ticket to go, enter any religious service in Mobile, which was kind of different and fun. I'd never done before. That was fun too. So just not unlike PR, every day is different.
Gotcha.
And I sound like a broken record, I know, but it just keeps coming up over and over, relationships. And it sounds like, even in your newspaper days, the relationships and the human interest type things is what has always had your attention, right?
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
So that's a big part of what you're doing now. It's all about kind of humanizing, taking the scary edge off of what cancer is and kind of the way it affects patients and that kind of thing, I would imagine.
Yeah, I hope so. So yeah, there is that, one-on-one, I get to meet someone who's inspiring, and you take a little piece of that interview with you, and then you meet someone else, and suddenly you have this whole treasure trove of ideas and thoughts and feelings, that you just kind of incorporate into your life. I've always felt like there was not a whole lot of barrier between, me as a person and what I did. But yeah, from the one of the first job I had when I got out of college was to work for the Clarion Ledger in Jackson. After a year of working the night desk, I thought I need something different. So started working for the business department, so covering business news. And my first day on the job, literally my first day, was the 1987, like when the stock market plunged.
Oh wow.
So I was like,
start.
oh my goodness. So then they send me out, like, you got to go do a story. Okay, whatever. And so I'm talking to stockbrokers, and I'm like, they're like talking about short selling and all this. And I'm like, oh, can you give me a definition? And they also gave me a T-shirt that had a bear that was hanging by a noose. I'm like, oh, thank you.
my
That's nice. So that was kind of a, baptism by fire.
Baptism by fire, absolutely.
But in a way, it really is. If you look back on big events over history, being a journalist, you kind of get a little bit of a front row seat, sort of. The most recent, when I was covering religion, it was when the whole same-sex marriage thing was coming about and the controversies. And so I got to go interview some people who were being turned away at probate. And that was pretty interesting. But there was a big gap also in my working life where I took a few years out to raise kids when they were little. And that was when 9/11 happened. So I wasn't around for that as much. I was at home, holding a baby, looking at the TV. So,
right. But
it's not that you want to undergo those kinds of disasters, but it's just, you just never feel more alive than when you're in the middle of this huge thing and you're on the edge of history. And there you are. I've got to go cover the stock market crash or the savings and loan crisis or the BP oil spill, which we wrote a lot of opinion about.
So of all this can be present day with your work at Mitchell and newspaper days and that kind of thing. But of all the people that you've met and stories you've covered, is there one person or thing that kind of stands out that's made an impact on you, or just something that when you're recounting your career to your grandkids one day, you're going to go back and say, look, I met this person one time, or I heard this story, or I saw this happen. Do you have one thing or two things you can point to that's had an impact on you?
So after the BP oil spill, this isn't so much like about a person, but as far as moments, we live on the water in Theodore. So after the spill, there was just so much like, what's going to happen? What's our water going to look like? Is it all going to be destroyed? Whatever. And I was just thinking about how do I get my arms around this? How do I feel about all this and what's happening? And my kids were still pretty young, and I'm like, are they going to get to enjoy the water? Blah, blah, blah. So I walked down on our pier and started thinking about it. And I was like, oh, I just feel like, we need divine intervention, kind of. And so instead of writing a regular editorial, it just hit me, and I thought, I'm going to write a prayer about this. Okay. I mean, they published it. Okay, thank you. But anyway, that was just one of those, that was one of those moments of clarity. It's like, okay, I'm going to think about this in a whole different way, and we're going to think outside the box. But the other thing, one thing I really take away from as far as the newspaper days is, just the eclectic people that work in that industry. And you really don't find that anywhere else. I mean, it's just, back in the day when I first got out of college, huge open newsroom, smoking, whatever, like people couldn't write a story without smoking, But of course, that's all different now. But I still love that community, and you really don't find it anywhere else. I love my PR family too, but journalists are just kind of their own little entity. But as far as people that I remember or people that made a huge impact, there was one person. And this was when I was still working for the paper. There was a young girl I was doing a story about, and she was a patient at a local hospital and was diagnosed with cancer. I'm sure she signed waivers. I won't mention her name here, but she had been diagnosed with cancer, and she loved the whole Duck Dynasty family and all them. And so she wrote to them and asked them to come. Like, she wanted to meet them. And so they worked out where they were making an appearance in Baldwin County, and she was able to go with the help of nurses and things like that. She passed away, and I had written about her, but it felt more than that. I went to her funeral, saw the nurses there, and now, working in a cancer institute, that's still with me. She was just an amazing young lady.
That's amazing. I was going
to say, you were there.
I was there in Baldwin County when they came.
It rained.
It did. It was awful. And I remember seeing her. We were sitting probably 3 or 4 rows behind her. She was up on the front row. They had her in a wheelchair, and they had her covered. But that was something. That was, yeah.
It really was. And I mean, I consider myself a religious person. I go to church locally or whatever, but it's never been as big a part of my life as it should be. But it was amazing I had my phone, and that's, in the new world of journalism now, you take videos with your phone, and that's the story, right? So after the presentation, everything they did, they actually are pretty authentic people.
Oh, yeah.
The family. So they kind of surrounded her stretcher and like said a prayer for her, like very privately. It wasn't for the world to see, but just an intimate moment, them, being with her. So that was very touching.
So I'll end with this one question. I asked the same question in the last episode, but I won't ask it again because I think that you've seen a lot, and you've had a just interesting, I think, career and your experiences with the newspaper and with the Mitchell Cancer Institute. So how many kids do you have?
3.
3. Okay. So, and how old are they?
25, 22, and 19.
Okay, so if you could give them, and I'm sure you have, but this is just for podcast land. So when they turned 18, give them one piece of advice. This is what you need. What I want to tell you to be able to carry you to your next stage in life. I mean, what is that motherly advice that you give them as they get ready to go out in the world?
Yeah, I'd say do something you'll be proud of 20 years from now. Do something you want to tell your kids about. I've been listening to a lot of Brene Brown lately, so I would love to tell them to dare greatly, but I don't know if I could be authentic in doing that. Please don't dare greatly. Please be safe. But yeah, I'm so proud of my kids. Bless them. We did the best we could. But yeah, I think be somebody that you'll be proud of, decades from now. Be who you would like your kids to be. I wish I could do that.
Can't think of a better way to end that. Carol, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
To learn more about the Cancering Podcast or read the blogs from USA Health, click the links in the show notes. And to hear The Cancering Show, go to canceringshow.com.